The FDA approved lab-grown meat for American grocery stores. That sentence sounds reassuring. It isn't. Because approved, in this specific case, doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean independently tested. It doesn't mean clinical trials. It means the FDA read the company's own safety report and said they had no further questions. That's it. That is the entire process that put this product on the path to your refrigerator. And that's just the first thing they're not telling you. I spent 3 weeks pulling regulatory filings, Senate testimony, and production biology research on cultivated meat. What I found isn't a conspiracy. It's something more uncomfortable than that. It's a system that was genuinely not built for what it's now being asked to govern. And the products are already moving toward shelves before anyone fixed that. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what's in the approval process that isn't in the press release. And there's one thing buried in the production biology that almost no mainstream outlet has touched. We'll get there. But you need the full picture first. Let's get one thing straight fast, because this gets confused constantly. Cultivated meat is not Beyond Meat. It's not Impossible Burger. Those are plants engineered to taste like meat. Cultivated meat is real animal cells, grown in a steel bioreactor, no slaughterhouse, no fields. Scientists take a small tissue sample from a living animal, isolate the muscle cells, submerge them in a nutrient solution, and those cells divide and grow into something biologically identical to conventional meat. That's not marketing language. That is the actual process. And on paper, it sounds like a miracle. Less land, less water, no animal killing. The Good Food Institute, the industry's primary research and advocacy organization, has published projections suggesting cultivated meat could reduce livestock-related greenhouse emissions significantly if it scales. Those projections are real. The intentions behind this technology are serious. So, why does the oversight picture look the way it does? In June 2023, Upside Foods and Good Meat became the first cultivated meat companies to receive USDA authorization to sell in the United States. Every headline called it historic. Most of them used the word approved. Here's what the process actually looked like. The FDA's role was to evaluate the cell cultivation and production stage. Their conclusion came in the form of what's called a no questions letter, issued to Upside Foods in November 2022. That letter gets cited as the safety green light, but read what it actually says. The FDA reviewed the company's submitted safety conclusions and found no questions to raise. The data being reviewed was the company's own data. There was no independent lab verification requirement, no mandated third-party testing, no clinical outcomes data. Because this product has existed for approximately a decade, and there is no long-term human consumption history to draw from. The framework used to assess it was something called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. That category was designed for food substances with established, multi-generational histories of safe use. Salt is GRAS. Vinegar is GRAS. Cultivated meat, a product that didn't exist before 2013, was assessed in part through the same regulatory lens as ingredients humans have consumed for centuries. That is a documented structural mismatch. It's in the public record. It's just not in the coverage. And here's what makes this more than a paperwork problem. The USDA side of the equation has a gap that the National Chicken Council flagged in written Senate testimony. Not a consumer group. The poultry industry? They submitted formal objections noting that the current framework has no requirement for producers to disclose scaffolding materials in standard nutrition labeling, which means, right now, you could eat cultivated meat and have no legal right to know every material used to give it structure. That's where the oversight actually stands. Here's where it gets specific, because cells in a nutrient solution leaves out several things you'd probably want to know. For most of the industry's history, the standard growth medium, the liquid that feeds the cells and keeps them dividing, contained fetal bovine serum, FBS. To be direct about what that is, it's blood serum harvested from fetal calves. It's collected during slaughter, it's expensive, it creates serious ethical problems, and it sat at the center of an industry that was supposed to be the animal-free future of protein. Most major producers have been working to move away from FBS towards serum-free formulations. That transition is real and ongoing. But the replacement formulations aren't just water and vitamins. They contain growth factors, proteins like IGF-1 and FGF2 that chemically signal cells to divide rapidly. These are reduced or removed at the end of the production process. The industry's position is that residual concentrations in the final product are negligible. That may be correct. But here's the specific problem. There is no standardized, independent post-market surveillance system in the United States that tests commercial cultivated meat products for residual growth factor levels. The Center for Food Safety filed formal written objections with FSIS flagging this exact gap. Those documents are public. The oversight framework trusts the production process to control for this. Independent verification of what's actually in the finished product at commercial scale is not currently mandated. That's not a fringe concern. That's a consumer protection infrastructure question with no answer yet. If you've seen cultivated meat on a menu or shelf and noticed a label that didn't add up, drop it below. I want to map how widespread the labeling inconsistency actually is at ground level. Here's the finding I mentioned at the start, the one that took me the longest to understand and that I have seen covered almost nowhere. Cultivated meat cells don't divide forever on their own. Normal mammalian cells have a biological division limit. It's called the Hayflick limit, and when they hit it, they stop. For a commercial producer running continuous production across months and years, cells that stop dividing are a production problem. So the industry solution is something called immortalized cell lines, cells that have been genetically or chemically modified to bypass that limit and divide indefinitely. Now here's the part that matters. Cells that divide continuously accumulate genetic mutations over time. This is not a theory. This is the documented cellular mechanism behind cancer biology. It's also well understood in pharmaceutical manufacturing and research biology. The cells change. The question that has not been answered for cultivated meat at commercial production scale is, at what rate does that genetic drift accumulate, across how many generations of division, and what does independent monitoring of that drift look like in a product headed to grocery shelves? David Humbird, a process engineer who has published detailed public technical analysis of cultivated meat production, has raised genomic stability of immortalized cell lines as an under-examined variable in commercial production runs. The Good Food Institute itself acknowledges in its published research agenda that genomic monitoring protocols are still being developed. The industry knows this is an open question. The regulatory requirements that products must currently meet do not yet reflect that it's open. To be precise, this is not evidence that cultivated meat is dangerous. It is evidence that we have not yet established what a validated, safe profile looks like for this specific production method at commercial scale. Those are not the same thing, and right now, they're being treated as if they are. This gap exists for a reason that has nothing to do with malice and everything to do with competitive pressure. China is investing heavily in cultivated meat technology. Singapore was the first country in the world to approve commercial sales in 2020. The argument being made at the policy level, and it's documented in Senate Agriculture Committee hearings, is that if the United States delays deployment while other nations scale, America loses both the economic and the strategic position in what could become a dominant global protein technology. That pressure is real. It produced a first-generation regulatory framework, one that both the FDA and USDA are actively continuing to build. Actively developing and adequate for consumer protection at commercial scale are different things. Right now, one of those is true. The other isn't. The legislation that would close the specific gaps, mandatory post-market surveillance, standardized genomic monitoring requirements, full scaffolding disclosure and labeling, has been introduced in Congress. It has not passed, and the products are already moving toward shelves. Here's the practical framework. 3 tiers based on how much this matters to your household right now. Minimum action. When cultivated meat appears in your store, look for products that explicitly disclose scaffolding materials and their origin. If the label says cultivated chicken with no component disclosure beyond the meat itself, that's a labeling gap the regulation hasn't closed yet. You have a right to ask the retailer for the producer's technical disclosure. That request creates accountability pressure, and enough of those requests in enough stores changes what companies put on packaging. Middle ground. The Good Food Institute maintains a public database of cultivated meat producers and their disclosed production methods. It's industry adjacent, not independent, but it tells you which companies operate with public transparency and which don't disclose process details at all. That distinction matters when you're choosing between brands. Better option? Frequency is the real variable here. Cultivated meat is not going to be the center of anyone's plate in the near term. The oversight infrastructure is being built in real time, waiting for post-market surveillance requirements to be mandated and tested before making this a dietary staple is not paranoia. It's applying the same logic you'd apply to any first-generation product in any other category. If any of this intersects with a specific health situation in your household, your doctor or a registered dietitian is the right conversation. This investigation is a starting point, not a prescription. Here's the real takeaway, and it's bigger than cultivated meat. We have built a regulatory architecture for novel foods that was designed for a pace of innovation that no longer exists. The FDA's GRAS framework, the USDA's labeling requirements, the post-market surveillance infrastructure, these were built in an era when new food technologies took decades to reach commercial scale. Cultivated meat went from first proof of concept to grocery store authorization in roughly 10 years. The people inside these agencies are not negligent. They are working within a structure that was genuinely not built for this speed. And the result is a product that carries a regulatory stamp that the public reads as thorough independent verification, when the documented record shows something more conditional than that. That gap between public perception of FDA approved and what that process actually evaluated is not a cultivated meat problem. It's a how we communicate regulatory science problem. And it's going to matter for every novel food category that comes next, because this is not the last one. You now know what the approval process actually looked like. You know what's in the production biology that hasn't been standardized. You know what the legislative gaps are and where they stand. That's not a reason to panic. It's a reason to read labels differently than you did this morning. The investigation into what's actually inside plant-based meat. The ingredients list that the clean label marketing is actively designed to obscure. That one is already up. And it surprised me in a completely different direction.